You might be wondering, Alberta and Ottawa, friends plotting a shared future or negotiating a powder keg? Today we dig into that alleged 80% alignment claim. What does it really mean? Is this progress toward a pipeline, or is it the first act of a deeper political trap? Stick with me by the end. You'll see how much is settled, how much is in question, and where the real tension lies. Let's start with the linchpin. Danielle Smith, Premier of Alberta, recently said that Alberta and the federal government are roughly 80% aligned on the terms of a possible new oil export pipeline. Smith's phrasing, "We're about 80% in agreement on most of the aspects." That's a striking statement. But what does 80% aligned really mean in this political context? It certainly suggests we're no longer in outright confrontation. Some elements of compromise appear to be in the works. Yet that remaining 20%? That might hold the difference between a real deal and a deal that unravels. Smith also noted, Alberta doesn't intend to build the new pipeline itself. Rather, Enbridge, South Bow, and governments Trans Mountain have offered technical support. The province is seeking a private sector proponent to carry the project forward. So already we see that Alberta is pivoting from a purely provincial push to a hybrid model, part planning, part external builder. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because in Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney, who assumed office earlier this year, has made statements that suggest he sees a new pipeline as highly likely to be designated a project of national importance. He frames new infrastructure and regulatory streamlining as central to his economic reorientation. Yet, and this is critical, Carney repeatedly positions the pipeline as a private sector initiative rather than something Ottawa will simply impose from the top. So we have Smith saying we're mostly aligned and Carney hinting we might fast-track such projects, but neither is confirming that all the moving parts are in place. Why does this 80% matter so much? Because pipelines are more than pipes. They are power, revenues, regional identity, environmental risk, and political leverage. Revenue and markets. Alberta has long pushed to diversify beyond the United States. A pipeline to the Pacific to the port of Prince Rupert would allow Canadian crude to reach Asian and global markets more directly. Smith has floated a capacity of up to 1 million barrels per day. Carbon capture link. Any pipeline agreement is likely tied to environmental demands, particularly the Pathways Carbon Capture and Storage (CCS) initiative in Alberta's oil sands. Federal support for that project may become a non-negotiable condition. Regulatory speed. A major complaint of Alberta for years has been the slow federal permitting regime. Carney's government has already launched a major projects office intended to streamline approvals for national interest projects. Political posturing. Smith's government has also emphasized Alberta's sovereignty via the Alberta Sovereignty Act, a standing posture that warns Ottawa not to overreach. She doesn't want the province to look weak. Opposition and backlash. British Columbia's government opposes overturning bans on oil tanker traffic off its coast, a critical corridor for any westward pipeline. Indigenous groups, environmental NGOs, and jurisdictions are likely to fight hard. So when someone says 80% aligned, we should ask, aligned on what? On capacity? Environmental standards? Regulatory terms? Profit sharing? Permitting speed? Or mostly in rhetoric? That last 20% may hide the real showstoppers. Let's walk through the potential traps and why this might not be peace at all. Vague alignment versus binding commitments. We're mostly aligned is not the same as we have a signed framework. It allows both sides wiggle room. Ottawa may claim to agree in principle while preserving the ability to withhold in practice. Who bears the cost and risk? If the province or private firms are tasked with major environmental risk or delay liability, they may balk. If Ottawa demands heavy oversight, Alberta may cry federal overreach. Environmental strings attached. The federal government will likely condition pipeline approval on demonstrable emissions reductions or contingent success of CCS plans. If Calgary fails to match those targets, Ottawa can step back. Regulatory and legal challenge risk. Even with a fast-track regime, courts, or constitutional challenges, by provinces, indigenous nations, environmental groups, can stop or delay a pipeline. That 20% could hide constitutional or jurisdictional tension, political signaling, and blame games. If things go wrong, both sides might blame the other. We wanted to, but they imposed conditions, they dragged their feet, etc. It paves political cover for backtracking. Private sector reluctance. Even if Alberta and Ottawa agree 80% on a blueprint, that doesn't guarantee a private pipeline firm signs up. Without financial models, binding contracts, and risk mitigation, some proposed pipelines die before shovels hit dirt. Provincial sovereignty tug-of-war. Smith has invoked the Alberta Sovereignty Act to resist perceived federal encroachments. If Ottawa attempts to force terms or override, Alberta may respond with legal or legislative pushback, public perception, and protest. Local opposition, environmental groups, First Nations, municipalities could mobilize, derail support, or generate political backlash that forces renegotiation or cancellation. So in short, yes, there's a framework forming, but the hidden battlegrounds remain vast. Now, here's where I lean. This is a negotiation in progress, not a guaranteed victory lap. The peace part is that both sides want something, not endless confrontation. But the trap may be that one side is setting terms stealthily so that later, the other side is boxed in. Smith's 80% gives her cover. She can claim she's working with Ottawa while retaining the flexibility to resist when she deems overreach. Meanwhile, Carney's talk of national importance and fast-tracking gives Ottawa broad authority to assert federal priorities under the guise of alignment. If Canada passes legislation giving the federal government wide approval powers over natural resource infrastructure as is underway, then that last 20% could shift decisive power to Ottawa, not Alberta. The pipeline could emerge, but under conditions that essentially hand Ottawa leverage over Alberta's resource development. So when I say political trap, I'm not saying there will be betrayal, but that the architecture is being laid for one side to hold more cards later. That's the tension. Are we witnessing genuine cooperation or a slow squeeze? To know whether this becomes peace or trap, keep your eyes on a few critical developments. The final agreement document if released. Look for binding commitments, penalties, and ambiguities. The Pathways Carbon Capture Project, how much federal funding, how binding performance targets, and whether it stalls. Ottawa's demands on environmental emissions, Indigenous consent, oversight clauses. So where are we now? Alberta says they're mostly aligned. Ottawa signals approval and reform. Private projects wait in limbo. The hazards are real. The incentives are strong. We haven't seen the entire map yet. This is a high-stakes negotiation under public scrutiny, withheld documents, and shifting political winds. Whether this becomes a lasting partnership or a power trap depends on the fine print, who holds the binding leverage, and how resilient each side is when pressure builds.